BIC episode number 67. A little bit of a bonus episode, but I did mention in the past that as far as these podcast episodes are concerned, I wasn't going to hesitate to do a solo podcast episode when I had something specific that I wanted to touch on and talk about. We had the regular episode this week, which was a great conversation as always, but this is something that I wanted to chat on specifically with myself because I thought it would be fun to go through a little bit of my history with some of my player collections. And that's something that obviously we've talked about quite a bit in the past on the podcast episode, given that Eric and Brandon both do their own player collecting pursuits. But this is one where I specifically wanted to focus on my own history with player collecting and kind of talk through my journey and how I ended up with a lot of the player collections I have today, and also how I kind of decided to set up my own personal pecking order as far as which ones get the most focus and concentration, which ones I'm still working on, and which ones have been retired. Now, to that end, I ended up putting a list together of all the different player collections that I've actually worked on over the years. I actually surprised myself a little bit, though, because I didn't realize it was quite as many as it was, but once I started putting together the list, it actually made a lot of sense. I didn't go completely chronologically, but I kind of went through them to the best of my recollection, and I was able to remember, oh yeah, I did collect that in the past, actually, and I remember why, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk through as far as this one is concerned. So one specific thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to keep two of them to the very end, and that's going to be my Mike Modano collection, which is the one that I'm kind of most, I guess, known for as far as my collecting pursuits. And then the other one is going to be the Britt Baker PC, because that's one of the ones that I talk about, the infamous Dennis PC, because that's one that I have a lot of fun with on the wrestling side of things. And that's also one that I've already had plenty of opportunity to talk about in the past. And if you're curious a little bit more as far as a showcase on that is concerned, on my wrestling YouTube channel, which I include a link to that in the description, you can check that out, because I actually did a showcase video pertaining to that, showing off a lot of elements of the collection and went through it quite extensively, including going through a lot of the rarer pieces, going through a lot of the different subsets and different rainbows that I've worked on. And going forward, that's where you're going to see a lot of updates as well, because I've definitely got some nice pieces that are going to be coming in through a Ship My Cards. But I'll talk more about that here in a minute. Let me start off, though, with two player collections that are actually in the category of what I would call retired. And these are ones that I started at various points through my collecting journey that I actually started for different reasons, but then down the road, I eventually kind of put to the side, and then I don't really add anything to them anymore, even though in a lot of cases, I still have a lot of the cards pertaining to them. So under that category, the first one that I'm actually going to talk a little bit about is Luc Robitaille. So a lot of these are going to be hockey, first because Canada, and second because a lot of the hockey is what was mostly available. It's one of those things where you have the most exposure, you have the most availability, in a lot of cases it makes the most sense. But then when I actually go through the rest of the checklist, you're going to see that there is a little bit of different categories covered. Hockey is obviously going to be prominently in there, but I've got 3 baseball players that are included in this. I also have 2 wrestling examples. I also have 2 football examples. So I've got a couple of different categories covered as far as different sports, and also kind of your entertainment category, if you wish, when we talk about the wrestling part. But the first one, as I said, is Luc Robitaille. So part of the reason for that is that that wasn't the first one that I worked on, but it was fairly early on. And part of the reason I did it was that at the time, one of my thought process was, you've got a player here that was a 600 goal scorer, and I was actually building a 600 goal scorers autograph set for myself, looking for different items, and Luc Robitaille was one of the ones that I ended up picking up for that. And at the same time, like, gives you kind of an opportunity to evaluate and look at these players again. You kind of think to yourself, man, a 600 goal scorer, one of the all-time great goal scorers of that era, but at the same time, not somebody that's thought about the most. So you kind of look at somebody who obviously has accomplished things, but at the same time seemed very affordable, seemed fairly reasonable. And in a situation like that, even though I have no direct connection to the LA Kings or Luc Robitaille specifically, I kind of just looked at it as a challenge, and I kind of thought it would be interesting to see, like, how many Luc Robitaille cards can I pick up relatively easily or inexpensively. And that's a recurring theme with some of these player collections. Sometimes I take on one of these projects just because it happens to interest me at the time. And in some cases, I stick with it, because I'll give you some examples of that. And in other cases, after a while, and I've been able to build a little bit of a collection, I kind of drop it and then move on to something else. But a lot of these, though, as I go through them, I do at least keep up with at least a little bit. As I said, there is a pecking order, but I'll go through that a little bit. But the Luc Robitaille is definitely one that was retired. I did pick up a lot of fun autographs and memorabilia cards, and a lot of singles that would fit into a Z Folio today. And that's going to be a recurring theme where I'll talk about some of these player collections. But it's a little bit of a mix and match of collection, but it wasn't one that I took too seriously, even though I was able to get some nice pieces here and there. And that's one that's definitely been in the category of retired. In the same vein, for a lot of the same reasons, another one that I would give you here in the same category of retired is Marian Hossa. And again, it was the same kind of thing where I look at, I have an affinity for a lot of these goal scorers, and it's fun for me to put together collections of those ones, and I've done that in the past. But in the same vein, it's this case situation where I picked up some nice cards, had a lot of fun with that, a lot of stuff that would be Z-Folio fodder as well, and it was relatively inexpensive, very cheap to get. This is one where I got a lot more autographs as well. That's one where I had a lot of fun with that section of it, and that will be a recurring thing with some of my other collections as well. But as far as that one's concerned, that's another one that kind of, after a while, I picked up a certain number of cards, and then eventually I kind of set that aside and retired it. Both of those are sitting in basically a 1600 count box in the collection somewhere on one of the shelves, and I get a chance to look at them from time to time, and it's a fun little collection to look through. But it's one of those things where it didn't really have the staying power because I was doing it more than anything else to something to keep me interested. And that's one of those situations where, from time to time, as a collector, even though I've got my main pillars that I consistently stick with and go back to, it is fun for me to have little diversions. So, from that perspective, I don't regret doing it because it allows me to keep things interesting, to keep things fresh. But I have found some other player collections that serve that purpose much better, and something that I actually do stick to in the long run, which I think is a little bit better. But you have to discover that. You have to try different things, I think, in order to really figure out your own path and how that needs to work for you. And as I go through some of these other ones, you'll see that I was able to find that in some of these other player collections that I've worked on, because that really became the genre that I really enjoy sticking to, even more so than building sets and all that. But one other thing I will mention, though, as far as sets are concerned, one thing that does help with not having too many more of these retired ones, the rest of these I do still participate in to varying degrees as I go through them. But I do enjoy now, instead of just picking a random player collection and just building it for a while and then kind of stopping, I think something that has been more effective for me has been to pick these little insert set projects, or in some cases, larger insert set projects. Something like my 1996 Topps Finest Gold Refractor set that I'm working on. That's something I can chip away at over time, but I'm not spending all my time focusing in on it. It creates a great diversion when things get a little bit stale with some of the player collections. And that's really what I was looking for with these player collections that I retired. I was looking for something to keep things interesting because things slowed down on some of the main player PCs for some reason or another. Okay, so now having discussed that, now let's get into some other player PCs. Now those first two are situations where maybe I have like 100 cards of each one of them. It wasn't really too crazy. It was something that I had some fun with, but I didn't really go too deep into the back catalog of a lot of their collections and try to build too much of a crazy collection. But some of these other ones, I actually went a lot deeper into it. So let me talk about the first one here that I want to discuss, and that would be Joe Carter. Now, this one is actually the very first player collection that I ever started working on. So this one goes all the way back to the 90s. It predates my Mike Modano collecting pursuits by, I think, a couple of months. So they both started right around the same time. So I've been collecting those two players for the longest. And for a while there, the Joe Carter one was the priority, even though I was working on the Modano collection, which continues to this day. And again, I'll talk about that one right at the very end, because that one I've got a lot that I could talk about. But the point is that this Joe Carter one, what really stemmed from, team fandom. It comes back to being a Blue Jay fan. It comes back to Joe Carter being, a catalyst for the two World Series teams, and of course hitting the infamous home run in 1993 against Mitch Williams. So that's a very good reason. Now, as far as the collection is concerned, I have probably about 300 or 400 cards. In the years since, I've slowed down a lot in terms of acquisitions, but I did have a lot of fun, though, building a lot more of the obscure issues, because since Joe Carter started in the 1980s, there's a lot of food issues and some more obscure things. And I was inspired in that 90s period when I started this collection. I was inspired by a lot of the player collection websites that were actually online at the time. I've referenced in the past Canseconet, which actually still exists. And if I can remember, I'll try to put a link in the description if you want to check it out, because that was a bit of a relic to the 90s and early 2000s when they were maintaining that website. But kind of their structure in terms of having this big checklist and everything that was kept on a website, I actually borrowed a lot of that at the time, was inspired by it, and had my own website where I kept my own checklists. And for the most part, other than the Modano collection, I really have never built another checklist like that again that I maintain in the same way. But it was a really good formative way for me to learn kind of the ropes of building a player collection. And I do still get some nostalgia from time to time, and I do still like picking up the odd Joe Carter card here and there. I even did that in my last ComC one where I grabbed a couple of fun cards, but it's definitely much lower on the priority scale today. But I still have the original collection inside of the binder, and a couple of odd cards here and there in one of the boxes that I do keep. And I like to grab the odd Joe Carter autograph, or 90s insert if I can get one inexpensively, and most of them are pretty inexpensive. And it is kind of a fun diversion, even though it's kind of one of the more OG player collections, which is a lot of fun as far as that piece is concerned. Next one here, I'm gonna lump it with the Joe Carter one because it's very similar, and that one was Carlos Delgado, and that's another one that I actually have maintained. And in terms of number of cards, the Delgado is actually, I think Joe Carter and Delgado are neck and neck, and Delgado might actually be a little bit ahead because I think I'm close to 400 cards of Delgado. And that one came about as a result of two things. One is Blue Jay fandom, which is obvious, kind of the same as Joe Carter. And the second one is, even though I appreciated Carlos Delgado at the time, I kind of appreciated him more in retrospect with how good he consistently was with the Blue Jays. And third is that I kind of looked at him as a guy where if things were reevaluated, he to me he's a borderline Hall of Fame guy with what he was able to accomplish in the time he was able to accomplish it. In that era, looking at what it was, he was one of the best power hitters for me at that time. Even though you're smack in the middle of the steroid era and you've got all these guys with these really inflated numbers, but in context, you look at a guy who was right on the cusp of 500 home runs before his career ended a little bit early due to injury, and he should probably have gotten there. And I think it would have changed the consideration for him. But I guess given where Fred McGriff finally ended up, I'd be surprised if down the road the Veterans Committee didn't look at him again and kind of look at what he was, especially in that early 2000s time period, because he had that runner-up finish in the MVP to, I believe it was Alex Rodriguez, who in retrospect we know what kind of happened there. And I guess it would be interesting to see what that career would have looked like if he had been allowed to finish the last couple of seasons, get the 500 home runs, and have the MVP award that he probably should have had. I think it would have given his career a little bit different context. But as it was, he was one of the best players, one of the best hitters, I should say, for a chunk of time there. Not necessarily the top guy, but definitely a top candidate. And it was fun watching him play in Toronto for those years. So I do have an appreciation for him. And in the time since, it's been fun picking up some Carlos Delgado cards. It is still lower in the pecking order. I'm not going to chase after the Delgado card first, but it is something where if I come across a really fun card that I can add to that collection, I kind of enjoy the challenge of doing so. All right, so that's 4 player collections down, and believe it or not, I have 7 to go. I came up with a list of 11, so I'm going to move on quickly through the next couple here, and we're going to see where we get to. First one that I want to talk about a little bit, now we're going to get into hockey again, is I want to talk about Jamie Benn. Now this one's kind of a fun one because it almost goes into the Delgado situation. Now reality is that Jamie Benn's interesting because his first season coincides with Mike Modano's last season in Dallas. So there's almost a little bit of you've got a connection there. You've got almost a handing over of the torch. And what's been kind of interesting with the Jamie Benn one is that he's got an interesting career. And that's something that I may talk more about in the future. But the Jamie Benn one has presented a fun challenge for me because he's got a lot of very interesting cards, enjoyable cards. You've got stuff from the Cup, you've got some really high-end stuff. But he's in a situation where he's a very inexpensive player relative to what has been a very good career as far as numbers, even though the way he's done it has been a little bit interesting. And the last couple of seasons, it hasn't been really that crazy or that great. But on the other hand, he's been the captain of Dallas, my favorite hockey team, for a decade, which I believe is the longest tenure in the Dallas side of things, which is kind of interesting if you really think about it. But he's also a guy who's on the cusp of 400 goals. There's a reasonable chance he gets to 1,000 points, but he's not even a point-a-game player. But he also won an Art Ross trophy. So he's got a weird career. So it's one of those things where I almost sit back and go, what do we make of his career if we take a guy who was a captain of a team for a decade plus and gets to 400 goals maybe in the next year or two, maybe gets to 1,000 points, which are good numbers, not obviously elite, all-time great, but still good. But at the same time, what if they were able to put the pieces together and he becomes a Stanley Cup winning captain on top of that? Does that make him a borderline Hall of Famer? Question mark. I don't know. Realistically, I'd be inclined to say no. Maybe more a Hall of Very Good in terms of the overall accomplishment. But it does make for an interesting case. But that isn't the reason that I started collecting them. It was more just related to the fandom. It was kind of an interesting, kind of a fun connection between the end of Modano's career and the beginning of his, and also the fact that I have the connection where I was able to have the opportunity during the brief stint where the Dallas, early in his career, actually put him down to the AHL to get some playoff seasoning because he was still a very young player at the time. And I got a chance to watch him live during an AHL playoff series, which was really fun. It was enjoyable, and it added a little extra connection to it, and it allowed me to kind of pursue it. Now, this collection, I actually started off with a very narrow scope. and that was just working on his rookie year stuff, which allowed me to really fixate and focus. So that was 2009, 2010. I was able to put together a checklist of all his cards for that year, and minus one of ones, I believe, if memory serves me, the number was 101 cards. And as it stands today, I think I want to say I have 67 or 68, which is a pretty good percentage as far as that rookie year collection is concerned. Eventually, I did expand the scope a little bit, which allowed me to have stuff that I put in a Z Folio. And if somebody seen some of the previous videos where I've referenced it, I don't take it too seriously because I've got PMGs in that Z Folio. So it's one of those things where I don't put too much emphasis on value as far as that's concerned. As long as I don't damage the card, I'm actually quite content to have it in the Z Folio and be able to flip through it and look at the cards. I don't know exactly how many cards I have for him now at this point. I want to say a couple of hundred, maybe pushing close to 300. So in this situation, it's not so much having a sheer large number of cards as much as it is having a little bit of quality over quantity, and obviously the real emphasis on that rookie year section of the collection. But I'm on the lookout from time to time. Again, this is still lower in the pecking order, but if I go to the expo or one of those shows and I see a really nice Ben card that I can pick up at what I think is a reasonable price, I don't hesitate to try my best to see if I can land it, especially if I can land it at a fun or reasonable price. That's really a big key for me as far as that one is concerned. Now, next up here on the list, again, I'm not doing it in a specific order, chronologically or otherwise. I'm just kind of finding little themes in here and I've decided to do it. So let's talk about Juan Soto. Now, Juan Soto is actually kind of interesting because I looked at what was a young player who I appreciated the plate discipline. I appreciated kind of elements of what he was doing as a hitter. And this is something where, especially when I initially started grabbing a few of his cards, they were actually fairly inexpensive. Now, obviously, he had a big run up there, won the World Series, they had some success, and then left the Nationals and went to San Diego and had a good season, I would say decent season. But it's one of those things where the expectations were already sky high, so it was hard to meet them. And now he's gone to the Yankees, which is a little bit of a catch 22 because I do hate the Yankees, but at the same time, I can very much see him having some success there. So, what I'll say about the Soto situation is that I initially started accumulating a number of cards, kind of had some fun with that. That's one way that I've built a lot of these player collections initially, was accumulation rather than having a specific tuned focus. But with Soto, I did the accumulation phase. I've got a Z Folio with some fun Soto cards that are relatively inexpensive, but then I also do have some nicer cards. But with Soto, what I'm trying to do right now is I'm actually in the process of taking some of these pieces and I'm trying to consolidate a little bit. Now, for Soto, one thing that I actually focused on fairly early that I've enjoyed and had some fun with is I don't have any hesitation about getting the quote unquote unlicensed cards, which is to say the Panini Prisms, the Selects, and those different brands, because I get to have some gold prisms and I was able to get some of those inexpensively. But I have tried to find a little bit more in terms of the rookie year. That's been an area where I've tried to consolidate and focus a little bit more on now, because I do feel like if I'm going to try to pick up some of these cards, I'd like to focus on some things that'll hold a little bit more value. Not necessarily because I'm concerned about the storage of value, but I don't need 100, 200, 300, $5 cards. I'd rather just have a more select grouping. I've still got the Z Folio that I can flip through and have some fun with looking at those cards. But now, if I'm going to buy a new one going forward, I'd like to have a little bit of focus and have a little bit of a theme. And that's kind of been the way that I've approached that particular player collection. Now, next up, let's talk about two kind of more fun kind of side collections that are, again, still on the lower pecking order side of things, but for different reasons. And first one is a little bit of an infamous one that I've had a lot of fun with, and that is the Josh Rosen, Chosen Rosen PC. Now, that one is 100%. I won't go as far as to say it's like a meme or like a gag collection that I work on, but it's very much in the sense of like, I am very aware that you're talking about a player who at this point has not accomplished much of anything. The value is at the lowest ebb it's going to be, well, maybe even lower, honestly. It can only go down at this point because you wonder, like, is this guy even remotely interested in even trying to play anymore? And it's weird because it's the structure of the NFL is such that if he actually expressed any interest and even tried, it's one of those things where he could pick up on a USFL team or UFL team or whatever, I guess whatever they call the amalgamated version of it now, and maybe find some new game tape. And there's just so many bad quarterbacks in the NFL that I can't discount the possibility there could be some kind of a comeback, but that isn't the reason I built the collection. What I saw and what I identified is here is one of the guys in that 2018 quarterback class that was one of the top 5 quarterbacks chosen that just hasn't worked out. And I talked about it in the most recent ComC pickup video on the channel. And that is that like a lot of these guys haven't had too much success. You know, Baker Mayfield didn't have a lot of, he had some success early, but then struggles came right after that, and then he has found himself a landing spot in Tampa, and good for him. And then Sam Darnold has bounced around now a couple different times, so he's a bit of a journeyman, and we're going to see what happens with him. Josh Allen has obviously had some success. Lamar Jackson has had some success, and we're still trying to figure out what some of these guys are going to do as far if they've got a future. But Josh Rosen is basically the odd man out. He's the one who doesn't have a job at the moment, and long run, more than likely, that's not going to change. But what created a lot of fun for me in this collection is that I look at it from the perspective of, and for this one, I narrowed it down to the rookie year. So I'm only looking for 2018 stuff. So that narrows the focus. But really, what I'm trying to accomplish with that, when I do look for stuff, and it's once in a while, I don't have too many save, I don't have any save searches or anything for those, but I will scan from time to time both ComC and eBay, and what I'm looking for is what are cards that I can get super cheap that in 2018 would have been like a great pull since it was one of the quarterbacks that people were chasing at the time. And that's kind of what I've been focusing in on. And I've been able to build what would have been a pretty crazy PC in 2018, basically for pennies on pennies of the dollar. And sometimes a project like that is what I have a lot of fun with. It's not something I focus a lot of energy or resources on, but it's something that I can do for my enjoyment. And it's silly and a waste of money, honestly, but I don't collect to preserve money, really. I collect as a hobby. I collect for my amusement, for my fun. And I've had a lot of fun with that PC. So that's been one that I've enjoyed. Now, the same vein to that, I'll talk about the first wrestling collection that I want to discuss a little bit, and that's JC Jane from WWE. Kind of what's funny about that one is it's almost the same kind of thing, although obviously not as bad. She's still employed by the company, but she's got this weird thing. If any of you follow wrestling at all, NXT is like their developmental brand, and she's like this weird character that is on TV pretty regularly, but at the same time doesn't ever seem to be accomplishing anything. It's just very strange that they've got her there doing all kinds of things. And for whatever reason, as a result of that, the cards do hold some value. So it's not like nobody wants them. Actually, they do hold a little bit of value. But I do try to find some value. I try to find some cards that are a little bit tougher and try to get them for a reasonable price. More than anything, it's just kind of for the challenge of the thing. That's kind of what I enjoy. It gives me a foothold in the WWE side of things, even though I don't enjoy WWE's product as much. Nonetheless, it gives me something to chase after. I like having at least one character from both promotions so that it kind of gives me a little bit of variety. And that's one of those categories here of a quote unquote player or character collection where I'm just looking for variety. It's a low priority item. If all things being equal, I'll choose one of the other ones first. But if I can come across a nice card for a relatively low price or a really cheap price, then I'm interested. It's one of those things where I'll look into it, but that's what I have fun with in those ones. Now that gets us down to our last 3 player collections. So I tried to not take too long in talking some of these other ones, but it looks like I'm already been talking for 20 minutes on them, so I'm going to get into these last couple. Now these ones are far and away my biggest priorities. As I basically mentioned in all the other ones, a lot of them I'm like lower priority, if the opportunity presents itself. These ones are the ones that I actively try to add cards for. These are the ones that I have saved searches for. These are the ones that I really do key in and focus on. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about these ones. So with that said, let's start off with the first of the 3 here that I want to chat on, and that's going to be the not swell fella PC, as I like to dub it. You know, my good buddy Brett Favre, or Brett Favre if you enjoy the less common, the incorrect pronunciation. I prefer my version. But nonetheless, so we've got that one. Quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, my favorite football team, the player who was spearheading and leading the team at the time that I kind of started following football more seriously. I was able to get in and start following them more closely in the mid 90s prior to the Super Bowl years. My timing was very good, obviously, but it's one of those things where he was a very exciting player, a fun player to watch. And as I say, not a swell fella. He's got his personal issues and personal demons that he's dealt with, but I don't collect him because he's a swell fella, as I kind of allude to, but just that he was a fun player to watch, an entertaining player to watch, and I do enjoy collecting his cards. and I've had the good fortune of being able to get myself some very nice cards. It's a situation where I do mix the quality and quantity side of things. I do have a Zfolio where I do collect some fun cards. I was able to add some good ones in the last ComC order, but I do have an eye out, and I'm on the lookout for quality cards to add. A lot of the 90s inserts, love those ones, especially some of the rarer and tougher pieces like the case hits or the multi-box hits and things like that. And the other side of the equation is also stuff like the rare memorabilia, especially with autographs. That's really what I care about mostly. It's the autograph inserts and autograph parallels, and that's kind of the category that I've made my niche. But most specifically, I really enjoy the playing day stuff. I really try to get some stuff from the late 90s, early 2000s, because I feel like there's a sweet spot of some awesome, well designed cards that fit this category and fit this niche. And that's really where I put my focus in on it. If I can get my hands on a really cool flawless card or national treasures, one of the higher end brands, quote unquote, happy to do so, but it's one of those things where I just kind of pick my spot and wait for opportunities. That's really what I'm looking for above all else. And I've got a few different pickup videos where I've been able to showcase some cards, and I believe I also have a Farv showcase on there as well. So it's one of those things where you can check it out on the channel if you're curious or interested. And that one is, I would say that I focus mainly on quality, but I do have a little bit of quantity with that as well. Not nearly in the hundreds of cards like some of the other ones I've talked about, or like the ones that I'm about to get to, but it's been a fun building the collection and definitely focusing on certain quality and certain sets and certain different types of inserts that really catch my eye and interest me. I am picky in that perspective, but the opportunities, and I learn about more different products and sets all the time, so I do find things that are interesting to me. That's where the safe searches make it a lot of fun for me to look into those. Next one here, second to last, is the Britt Baker PC. So this is the other wrestling one. This is one where it's the AEW side of the coin versus the WWE side of the coin. Now, by comparison, Britt Baker is definitely more of a higher end character within the AEW side of things. She was a feature player for AEW, one of the main ones that was featured, especially in the early days of AEW. And I thought they did a very good job with that presentation. I enjoy professional wrestling. I enjoy the story element of it. And I think she's probably one of the more developed characters they've got. But the bottom line is this. It's been a lot of fun to put together a collection like that. Now, this one, I think, holds a distinction for me. And this is from the player collecting perspective, this is what I'll throw out here. I would say it holds a distinction for me, given that AEW hasn't had that many years of product going back. Since the company's only really existed for 5 years, and with the licensing situation being through Upper Deck, there's only so many sets. So the result is that we've only got so many cards to chase after. Now, that number grows all the time. Each one of these products and parallels and inserts and all kinds of things do have created a bit of a challenge to chase certain things. And it feels like there's some stuff that I'm still waiting to appear. But starting basically with 2021 AEW flagship, as far as the Upper Deck is concerned, I've been able to acquire most of the cards available. So from a percentage basis, I would argue that this is the player collection that's probably my most extensive relative to the amount of cards available. So that's one of those things where it's made at very much a challenge, because I've been able to acquire a lot of the cards that are out there to chase after. And my checklist is still a decent size, but relative to the amount of stuff that we're starting with, I've got most of the stuff. The only real things that are missing are really super rare pieces and one of ones, basically, and stuff that people want way too much money for. So it's one of those things where it has definitely been a challenge. But as I talked about the whole pecking order and everything, this is right at the top, because I'm constantly doing the safe searches, trying to add pieces. And I've had the good fortune that some other folks that were collecting that kind of decided to get out of it, in some cases reached out to me to offer the possibility of acquiring a couple of pieces. And I've been able to add some really nice ones recently, which will come in a future mail day. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But this is one of the key ones that I've definitely been keyed in on searching for in Facebook groups and Instagram and on eBay safe searches. And that brings me to the last one. This is basically, along with the Joe Carter one right there at the very end, one of my OG player collections, which I've been working on since the mid 90s. So that makes it, pushing 30 years collecting the player. This is Mike Modano. It's probably the player collection that I'm most known for. If you go check my Instagram, you'll probably find a disproportionate number of Modano cards. I am constantly searching, constantly looking for. Sometimes there's some ebbs and flows, but I'm always looking to add more. Now, in comparison, all these other ones where I'll talk about maybe having 100 cards or a couple of 100 cards or even 300 or 400 cards. And maybe for the Britt Baker, it's probably 200 ish, somewhere there. But relative to the checklist, like I said, the percentage is very high. Well, with the Medano collection, I wouldn't say the percentage is anywhere nearly as high. In fact, it's still much, much lower. However, Medano has pushing 6,000 cards, and at this point, I have cleared 2,600 different. So while the percentage may not be as impressive, 2,600 cards means I've got a massive cardboard basically that I've collected of his over the years. And the other element of it is that really, if I break it down, and I have, I've got a spreadsheet that I kind of keep tabs of. One of the key areas that I focus on is the player playing days side of things. And as far as that's concerned, my percentage is pretty good on those and has been getting better all the time, especially the first 10 years, where, the first 5 years, I'm down to 8 cards of the entire checklist that I need. And as far as the next 5 years after that, I'm comfortably under 100 cards. So between the two, it's, probably close to 1,000 cards in the first 10 years, and I'm down to comfortably under 100. Percentage wise, that percentage is very high. And for the next 5 years, it's still pretty good. So playing days wise, I've actually got a pretty decent percentage, and I'm constantly working on chipping away at that. One of the reasons why, though, it's very difficult is for the post playing days, is that he's in the Legends rotation for Upper Deck, so he gets included in card sets all the time. So they add a bunch with parallels and things. So like I stopped worrying about that because it's just very difficult. But if money was no object, I could probably add another 1,000 cards just going on eBay and hitting buy it nows. So I haven't tried to do that. I really do try to key in and focus on the playing day stuff really as a main priority. However, if I see a really cool card from a newer product, I'm definitely still interested. That's where all my safe searches come into play. I've got certain specific cards and sets and things that I'm looking for. Stuff from the cup was a priority for a very long time. It still is, but I've got a lot of the stuff that I want now, which has really been a lot of fun. UD Black would be another product that I've definitely focused in on over time and had a lot of fun with. And something that I'm trying to grab a little bit more of now is some of the brief run that Panini had with hockey. Some of the National Treasures and some of the other ones, the Prisms and all those things. I've got a fair number of that stuff, but there's still definitely some opportunities I think that I could grab some more. So bottom line, the Medano collection along with the Joe Carter one are the longest tenured player collections I've been working on. I have been consistently chipping away at that for the better part of 30 years, adding cards every single year, all the time, and constantly searching for those opportunities. But it does get tougher. I'm very much at a state where a lot of the stuff that I want, I have, but there's still more stuff on the checklist out there. But I do try to add stuff where I can. And it remains a challenge. It remains a lot of fun. But when things do plateau a little bit, that's where a lot of these other player collections and having the variety of different things that I can pursue has really been very useful and very helpful to me as far as keeping things interesting, keeping me engaged in the hobby. Now, looking ahead in the future, I really don't see it slowing down. It's one of those things where my save searches are constant. I'm still working on it all the time. Even as I was talking through this here, I was on eBay earlier today looking through the save searches, trying to find and see if there's something else interesting that I can add. I did find a card that I thought would be fun, a newer post playing days card, but a set that I like, a design that I like. I'll probably make an offer. So it's one of those things where it's a constant flow. It's a constant work in progress, trying to add pieces to it. But just look at my Instagram, you'll see. I've worked on that for a long time. I feel like I'm always adding pieces constantly, and I'm going to the Spring Expo here in about a month or so. And one of the key priorities out there will be to look for Medano cards that I don't already have. I don't find them all the time anymore. Sometimes it's a handful if I'm lucky, but I keep chipping away at it, and it's been a consistent project of mine for most of my collecting life. So it's been a lot of fun. Now, so that really covers kind of a deep dive into a lot of the player collections that I've done. I think my biggest takeaway, the thing that kind of surprised me, was I didn't realize that I had a list of 11. And I've really only retired 2 of them, which means I've got 9 different collections that, at the bare minimum, are still on my radar somewhere. A bunch of them are obviously much lower priority. The last 3 that I went through are very much the ones that I focus on day to day when I'm collecting. But it is fun to have some of these other ones where, hey, there's a nice Delgado card, or hey, that's a cool Joe Carter. What's the price tag? You know what? That'd be kind of fun to add. Let me throw that into the collection. That'd be fun. And that's been kind of the approach that I've taken to a lot of this, and that's why the player collection side of thing has always been what has interested me more. I never was a big set builder. I've built some sets in the past, and I will build more in the future. but I'm very much in the camp of player collecting. It's just flat out the one that has given me the most enjoyment, and it is my bread and butter. It's the thing that I do, and it's something that I don't foresee changing because it really creates that element for me, allows me to build, either Z folios or boxes where I get to see all these different designs, all these different brands, but have it through the focus and the prism of an individual player or character, is if you're talking about the wrestling kind of thing. So with all that said, it's been fun doing kind of this deep dive with you. So this was a kind of a bonus episode, episode 67. That we will be back with another regular episode here early this next week, here after this long weekend, and we'll be back with a lot of the regular topics and breakdowns that we usually do. So that'll be episode 68. So you're getting a bonus episode here in between the other two, and I'll come back and do these from time to time if there's a topic, especially. So with that said, if you're checking this out on the YouTube, I also will include a audio version of it in the podcast feed. There's really no video with this one. It's going to be a static image. But if you enjoyed, or if you have any thoughts, or you do your own player collecting, I would love to hear some stories, or maybe a little bit more about if you've got other player collections beyond like maybe your main one. For me, obviously, as I showed, I've got a lot of different player collections that I kind of still keep up with, even though I've retired a few of them. I'd be curious if some of you have maybe a player or a character or something that you're mainly known for, that's your kind of your main focus, and maybe a second or third or whatever the case may be for you that you chase after that creates a fun challenge for you. So with that said, from the YouTube perspective, more videos coming up on the channel. I do live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time where we talk a lot of silliness nonsense. This past episode definitely qualified as that. We had a lot of fun with it, though, I will say. But for the podcast feed, we'll generally have an episode per week. And as I said, we'll definitely have episode 68, which will be on its normal cadence. It drops on Tuesdays usually, where we've got more of a panel version, and we'll talk about a couple of different related topics to that. With that said, thanks very much for indulging me in this journey, and we'll catch you in the next one.